In a tense congressional chamber, Clarence Thomas didn't just mock Jasmine Crockett's law degree, he tried to erase her. With one smirk, he questioned her right to even sit at the table. But what he didn't see coming was a 47-second response that shattered 3 decades of silence. One insult lit the fuse. One woman detonated the truth. When the most powerful judge mocks the wrong woman, does he fall, or does America finally wake up? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The chamber doors slammed shut with a finality that silenced even the air. Inside, the setting was stark. No cameras, no public seating, just lawmakers, staff, and two people at war. Justice Clarence Thomas sat draped in his black robe like a monument, chin raised, hands folded, eyes cold. 30 years on the bench had hardened him into stone. In his mind, this wasn't an inquiry. It was beneath him. Then Jasmine Crockett walked in. Red blazer, back straight, eyes like steel. She didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. Her presence cracked through the tension like a lightning bolt. She sat across from Thomas without looking away for a second. The contrast was electric. Age versus fire, tradition versus truth. The chairman barely finished. Today's hearing concerns judicial ethics. Before Thomas smirked, leaned forward, and muttered, "She's not ready." Jasmine stared him down, dead silent. Then she whispered, "Watch me." And then, without warning, Clarence Thomas struck the first blow. "Your law degree? From Houston? That's hardly Supreme Court material." His voice cut through the chamber like a blade, calm but soaked in contempt. The words didn't need volume. They carried weight. He didn't look at the committee. He didn't look at the chairman. His eyes were fixed solely on Jasmine Crockett, as if daring her to react. Then he added, louder this time, "You're not even a real attorney, just another political face in a suit. A congresswoman playing pretend." A hush swept through the room like a sudden draft. The tension twisted into something sharper, heavier. Chairs didn't creak. Pens didn't scratch. No one blinked. The only movement came from the cameras, zooming in. First on Thomas's stone-cold stare, then on the stunned faces of the committee members. Some were clearly caught off guard. Others exchanged glances. A few even nodded subtly, as if silently agreeing with Thomas's arrogance. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't even shift in her chair. She let the insult hang in the air like smoke. Every syllable of his dismissal, Houston, not real, pretend, echoed off the marble walls and into the bones of everyone present. But she refused to meet it with rage. Not yet. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was the kind that screams louder than fury. She stared at him with eyes that didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't soften. The room began to feel like the edge of a thunderstorm, still and heavy, but waiting. Jasmine's hands rested calmly on her folder. Her back stayed straight. But something had shifted. There was fire behind her eyes, bright and unwavering. She was calculating, not retreating, reloading. Thomas had tried to humiliate her in front of the nation, but she didn't fall into his trap. She just waited, letting him dig the hole deeper with his own voice. Then it happened. Barely noticeable, but unmistakable. Jasmine's lips curled into a small, tight smile. Closed, restrained, precise. A moist smile, the kind you give not out of kindness, but out of preparation. She knew this moment was coming. She hadn't come here to defend herself. She'd come here to end something. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't blink. She just reached into her briefcase, like a gunslinger unholstering the first bullet. The click of the latch was louder than it should have been. Even the air seemed to pause. Jasmine Crockett pulled out a thick folder, charcoal black with a crimson seal on the cover. She laid it flat on the desk, turned it to face the committee and Justice Clarence Thomas, and opened it slowly, deliberately, like someone lifting the lid off a long-buried secret. Her voice dropped into something sharp and lethal. 15 years in practice, over 200 cases, 92% success rate, 2 arguments before the Supreme Court. The room inhaled and didn't exhale. Thomas leaned back, crossing his arms with a scoff that barely hid his unease. "That's just local work," he sneered. Entry level. Not what I'd call judicial weight. I've carried the Constitution for 30 years. You've carried a briefcase. He chuckled softly, but the laugh didn't land. It sounded forced, defensive, arrogant, and for the first time, slightly desperate. Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't look away. She just flipped to the next page. Crockett v. Denton County Sheriff's Department resulted in a redefinition of qualified immunity across 2 states. She flipped again. Martin v. Abbott, now cited in 7 circuit opinions on custodial interrogation. She paused. Ramos versus City of Waco. You may remember that one. It was just referenced by the 5th Circuit last month. Her tone was razor sharp. Each name she read was a wound. The room dropped into an unnatural stillness. No coughs, no whispers. Even the pens had stopped moving. One senator slowly turned his head toward Thomas. Another leaned back, arms crossed. One staffer blinked like he'd just seen a ghost. The spell of judicial supremacy had cracked, and all eyes knew it. Thomas shifted in his seat. The fingers on his right hand began tapping. First slow, then uneven, then stopping altogether. He looked down at her folder, lips pressed tight. But he said nothing. For a man known for silence on the bench, that silence now felt like surrender. Jasmine didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to smile. Instead, she slid the folder 1 inch closer to him, the top page still visible. These aren't local skirmishes, Justice. These are federal landmarks. You sit above the law. I've been in it. Bleeding, fighting, winning. Her voice was calm. Too calm. That made it terrifying. Thomas's jaw clenched. His robe, once regal, now looked more like armor, rusting in real time. His smirk was gone. His breath shallow, his hands still. The courtroom hadn't erupted, but it didn't need to, because in that moment, everyone understood. The robe wasn't shielding him anymore. It was suffocating him. But Jasmine wasn't done dismantling illusions. She was just loading her next round. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Jasmine reached back into her folder and slid out 2 pristine copies of academic journals. One stamped Columbia Law Review, the other Harvard Law Review. She placed them neatly on the table, like a surgeon laying out her sharpest tools. Her eyes never left Clarence Thomas. These, she said with unnerving calm, are my words, peer-reviewed and published. Columbia, Harvard. Her fingers tapped the covers once, softly, lethally. Thomas let out a low chuckle, but it wasn't confidence. It was deflection, barely holding its shape. Law reviews publish endless opinions. That proves nothing. He waved his hand, brushing off the 2 most elite academic forms in legal scholarship like old newspaper. The arrogance in his voice echoed through the chamber like a dropped gavel. His smile returned, but this time it twitched at the corners. Nervous, artificial. Jasmine didn't blink. She opened to a bookmark page and pushed the Columbia issue forward. Limits of executive power in constitutional crisis. Her tone was clinical. Cited in 4 district courts and 1 appellate ruling in the last year. She turned to the second article. Originalist Interpretation and Judicial Ethics, a Conflict in Plain View. Then she added, slow and sharp, Justice Kagan referred to this one as particularly illuminating. The moment snapped. A sudden jolt of movement. Cameras swiveling. Staffers froze mid-note. A low gasp came from someone in the second row, and the cameras locked on Clarence Thomas. He stared at the documents. His smirk flickered, then vanished entirely. His face, normally unreadable under years of courtroom stillness, flushed deep red. It crawled from his neck to his ears like guilt made visible. He shifted in his seat. The weight of that robe, once a symbol of dominance, now looked like it was suffocating him. The committee members exchanged looks. A few whispered. One reached for a copy of Jasmine's article like it was radioactive. Jasmine didn't say a word more. She didn't have to. The air in the room did the speaking now. Charged, volatile, tilting in her direction. This was the line in the sand. Thomas had leaned on time, on tenure, on titles. Jasmine had responded with truth, with ink, with public record. And now the most powerful judge in America sat exposed, not by scandal, not by media, but by something far more dangerous, a younger, sharper mind with receipts. She leaned back in her chair. No smile, no gloating, just eyes like steel, watching a giant quietly realize he'd stepped into the wrong room with the wrong woman holding the truth. But Jasmine hadn't just come with credentials. She'd come with a loaded file that had the power to detonate the very name Clarence Thomas. She reached into her briefcase one final time. No hesitation, no flourish, just purpose. What came out was a blood-red folder, thicker than the others. No label, no logo, just quiet destruction bound by a spine. Jasmine laid it on the table with the precision of someone dropping a match on gasoline. This, she said slowly, her eyes locked on Thomas, details over $2.8 million funneled from Harlan Global Strategies into multiple entities tied directly to you. Silence didn't fall. It collapsed. One senator exhaled audibly. Another murmured, "What the hell?" without realizing he'd said it out loud. Staffers leaned forward in unison, as if pulled by gravity. A low rustle spread across the room, the unmistakable sound of panic in suits. Clarence Thomas blinked, then straightened, his robe suddenly looking like armor made of paper. Jasmine flipped the folder open like a prosecutor opening a coffin. Page 1, 6 wire transfers from Harlan Global Strategies, totaling $1.4 million, directed into the Liberty Civic Foundation, legally controlled by your wife, Jenny Thomas. Her tone was sharp, almost surgical. Page 2, a $900,000 transfer routed through a Delaware shell to the Thomas Judicial Education Initiative. She looked directly at him, a group that never filed a single activity report. Thomas slammed his palm against the desk. "Fabrication! Lies!" His voice thundered, desperate and furious. "You will not smear my name with this garbage. I've served this country longer than you've been alive." But his voice cracked mid-sentence. The man who once controlled rooms with silence now couldn't stop shouting over his own crumbling legacy. Jasmine didn't flinch. She turned calmly to the committee chair. "Mr. Chairman, I request permission to present visual evidence to the committee." The chairman, pale and rattled, gave a slow nod. "Proceed." The lights dimmed. The projector came alive. Slide 1. High-resolution screenshots of bank transfers from Harlan Global's offshore accounts, names and routing numbers visible, leading straight to Liberty Civic. Slide 2. Internal emails from Harlan executives. One line lit up the screen like lightning. "Justice Thomas expects no paper trail. Keep it under advisory level." Slide 3. Scanned signature. Clarence Thomas in black ink, approving speaking fees disguised as outreach stipends. Slide 4. A memo from Jenny Thomas labeled confidential, acknowledging outside coordination with Harlan in exchange for narrative influence. The room exploded. One aide dropped a stack of papers trying to get to their phone. A reporter stood up mid-row, forgetting protocol. Flashbulbs burst. One senator actually whispered, "Oh my God," like a prayer. The chairman's gavel pounded furiously. "Order! Order in the chamber!" But no one heard him. They were all watching Clarence Thomas, watching the color drain from his face, watching his hands stop moving, watching the mask fall. And Jasmine just sat still, hands folded, letting the documents speak for themselves. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gloat. Because in that moment, the only thing louder than the evidence was the silence of a man who had run out of ways to deny it. The robe no longer protected him. It exposed him. And the entire country was watching. With the walls of denial closing in, Clarence Thomas didn't retreat. He lunged. "You are nothing but a political opportunist." The words shot out of his mouth like venom. His voice, once polished and measured, now cracked with fury. He leaned across the desk, jabbing a finger in the air. "This isn't about ethics. This is about ambition. You're not here to fix the system. You're here to build a career on tearing it down." His eyes burned. His hands clenched the edge of the table, like it was the last barrier he had left. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She let his insult hang in the air, let it echo off the cold marble, let every syllable reveal just how much power panics when cornered. Then with a voice like a steady blade, she answered, 30 years on the bench, Justice Thomas. And how many times did you fight for an ordinary citizen against power? She leaned forward just enough to cut through the silence. How many times did you protect someone without a billionaire behind them, or without a book deal in your pocket? The chamber went dead still. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just the sound of power being undressed in public. Thomas didn't respond. He couldn't. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. His jaw clenched. His fingers stopped moving. For the first time, silence wasn't his weapon. It was his defeat. Jasmine reached down, this time with finality. She pulled out one last folder, thinner than the others but heavier in consequence. She held it up without looking away. "Let's talk about books," she said. "Specifically, the ones you've been forcing universities to buy in exchange for your presence." The screen behind her came alive. Slide 1 appeared with a cold thud. A contract from Hanover University. Speaker agreement, Justice Clarence Thomas. Payment, $1.2 million. Clause 4. A. University agrees to purchase a minimum of 10,000 copies of the Justice's co-authored publication as part of engagement terms. Jasmine read it aloud, slowly, mercilessly. Failure to purchase shall result in immediate cancellation of appearance. Gasps spread like wildfire. Slide 2. Board memos from Hanover titled Reputational Concerns. One line highlighted in red, "Coerced curriculum mandates for judicial access are ethically indefensible." Slide 3. An invoice from Civic Academic Press showing similar arrangements with Georgetown, Tulane, Stanford, and Northern Michigan University. Total combined payouts, $4.6 million, all tied to Thomas. All required forced purchases, all disguised as education, and then detonation. Reporters leapt to their feet. Flashbulbs popped like gunfire. A senator stood up mid-hearing, yelling to his aide, "Get the Judiciary Committee on the line, now!" The chair slammed the gavel 3 times. "Order! Order in this chamber!" But it was like trying to hold back a dam with a teaspoon. Thomas's face was ghost white. He wasn't blinking anymore. He wasn't even breathing visibly. The room, the robe, the bench, none of it could shield him now. What had always been whispered in corners was now written in contracts, splashed across a congressional screen. And Jasmine, she didn't move. She didn't smirk. She simply turned her gaze back to Thomas and whispered into the microphone, calm and devastating. "You didn't just sell your name, Justice. You sold the court with it." And in that moment, for the first time in U.S. history, the illusion of Supreme Court invincibility shattered before the eyes of a nation. And then Jasmine gave the signal, and the screen lit up with the truth. The lights dimmed just slightly as the projector came to life behind her. All eyes turned to the massive display above the hearing floor. The first image hit like a bullet, a high-resolution scan of a wire transfer receipt, $1.2 million from Hanover University. Next slide, a contract with Clarence Thomas's signature in crisp, unmistakable ink. Then came the emails, internal memos and payment ledgers, one after another, each more damning than the last. It wasn't speculation. It wasn't accusation. It was proof. Justice Clarence Thomas bolted upright in his seat, face flushed with rage. He pointed across the table like a man drowning in his own robe. "This is an ambush," he bellowed, voice shaking the walls. "This is political theater, nothing more." But no matter how loud he screamed, he couldn't drown out what was now 10 feet tall behind him. His signature, his name, his price. He wasn't being accused. He was being unmasked. The room was frozen. No one reached for water. No one whispered. The only sound was the dull hum of the projector, spitting out slide after slide of receipts. Jasmine didn't say a word. She let the evidence speak. Then slowly, deliberately, she turned in her chair. Not toward Thomas, not toward the committee, but toward the live camera broadcasting nationwide. She looked directly into the lens, her voice calm but cutting through every screen in America. "This isn't about me or him. It's about America's trust in justice." Her words hung in the air like a funeral bell. It wasn't defiance. It was a declaration. the kind that doesn't need shouting because the truth is already deafening. Households across the country went still. In diners and bars, on living room couches, in law schools and federal offices, people leaned in, mouths slightly open. The feed split instantly across cable news. CNN, live, Fox breaking news, MSNBC special coverage. Within minutes, legal panels formed on air. Some experts defended Thomas, calling it a setup. Others called for his immediate resignation. Debates flared, but one thing was unanimous. The evidence was real. The split screen on every news broadcast told the story with brutal clarity. On one side, Justice Clarence Thomas, once the untouchable titan of the Supreme Court, now sweating, silent, small. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, once dismissed as just a politician, now holding the gavel the justice feared most, public truth. It was a perfect reversal of power. One man armored in 3 decades of unchecked influence, now visibly shaking as his empire cracked. One woman, once talked over and talked down to, now commanding a nation's attention with nothing but facts and fire. And the difference between them had never been clearer. She didn't yell. She didn't gloat. But in that moment, Jasmine Crockett didn't just expose corruption. She redefined what power really looks like. When the screen went dark and the hearing adjourned, no one said a word. But the silence didn't last long. There was no shouting, no final objections, no closing remarks. Just the soft shuffle of papers, the creak of chairs, and the heavy weight of a chamber that had just witnessed something irreversible. Clarence Thomas stood motionless, his head slightly lowered, robe heavy with the echo of receipts and revelations. Jasmine Crockett gathered her folder without a word. As she walked out, even her footsteps felt louder than the gavel. Inside the hearing room, power had gone silent. Outside, the country exploded. By nightfall, nearly every major news outlet had updated their homepage. The New York Times, 47 seconds that shook the Supreme Court. The Washington Post, the moment power was challenged, and blinked. Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, all aired split screens of Jasmine staring down Thomas, frozen in a moment that already felt historic. It wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was an earthquake. In diners across the South, people gathered around TVs, forks paused midair. In New York office towers, staff huddled around conference room screens replaying the clip again and again. On college campuses from Harvard to Houston Community College, law students passed the video around like sacred text, quoting Jasmine's line, "This isn't about me or him, it's about America's trust in justice." One Harvard professor tweeted, "My students just watched it 3 times. They're not studying case law tonight. They're watching it unfold." Twitter trended with Crockett 47. TikTok blew up with side-by-side reactions, edits, and analysis. Instagram stories across the country showed the moment Thomas froze. The screen behind him still lit with his signature. In Facebook groups for veterans, single mothers, school teachers, and retired postal workers, one phrase kept appearing. She said what we've all been dying to say. At barber shops, nail salons, church basements, and union halls, people didn't talk about politics. They talked about power, about what it meant to see someone challenge it and not back down. She didn't yell, she didn't cry, she didn't blink, one woman said in a cafe in Detroit. She stood there and burned the whole illusion to the ground. By morning, the impact had reached Capitol Hill. Congress announced an emergency bipartisan session to discuss judicial ethics reform. Committee heads released statements promising a full review of all financial ties involving members of the judiciary. For the first time in decades, both parties agreed. Something fundamental had broken, and it couldn't be ignored anymore. But even beyond legislation or headlines, something deeper had shifted. In every corner of the country, people were saying the same thing. Finally, someone spoke for us. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with clarity, evidence, and the calm precision of a woman who refused to bow. The contrast was unmistakable. Thomas, once untouchable, now rattled, exposed. Jasmine, once dismissed, now immortalized. One symbol of the old guard, the other a new voice for justice that wouldn't be silenced. And across America, people didn't just watch it happen. They felt it, and they wouldn't forget. But the hearing wasn't the end. It was the match that lit a nationwide chain reaction. Within 48 hours, civil rights organizations, bar associations, and law schools across the country launched emergency roundtables and forums. The National Bar Association called it the most pivotal legal moment since the Warren Court era. The American Constitution Society released a statement titled, "A Turning Point in Judicial Accountability." At Stanford Law, students gathered for an impromptu screening and discussion. One second-year student stood up and said, "This isn't just about Justice Thomas. This is about the oxygen we give to unchecked power." Professors didn't assign reading that week. They assigned reflection. Across the country, city after city saw peaceful protests. From Chicago to Atlanta, Seattle to New Orleans, people took to the streets with signs held high. "No one above the law. Truth has no robe. We saw her stand, now we stand too." Mothers marched with their children. Retired judges walked side by side with law students. On courthouse steps, citizens laid printed screenshots of Thomas's contract invoices and Jasmine's quotes like flowers at a monument of reckoning. The shockwave didn't stop at the border. BBC, Le Monde, Der Spiegel, Al Jazeera, and the Asahi Shimbun all ran front-page headlines. America's Supreme Reckoning. The Guardian called it a clash that cracked the marble facade of American legal supremacy. A legal columnist in Japan wrote, "When a lone voice confronts the might of the state and does not falter, the entire world listens." What had started in a hearing room without cameras now circled the globe like a warning siren, and no one could pretend not to hear it. But perhaps the loudest reaction wasn't from newsrooms or marches. It came from the hearts of those who'd spent years believing their credentials would never matter. In small law schools and evening classes, in HBCUs and community colleges, young lawyers watched Jasmine Crockett stand her ground and saw themselves. They replayed her voice again and again. One student at Southern University Law Center whispered through tears, "She wore red so we'd see her, but she stood so we'd believe in ourselves." A public statement from a coalition of state law schools read, "This moment proves what we've always known. Legal excellence does not require ivy walls. It requires courage." For the first time in decades, the walls of elitism cracked, and behind them stood the thousands who finally felt seen. The symbolism extended even further. Communities long pushed to the margins. Black Americans, immigrant families, single mothers, first-generation students, claimed Jasmine as their voice. Murals of her standing across from Thomas appeared in alleyways in Oakland and outside bookstores in Baltimore. In Miami's Little Haiti, a pastor's Sunday sermon began with her image on the projector and the words, "If God sent a fire to expose injustice, this woman struck the match." And in response to that fire, Congress moved. Within a week, House leadership announced the drafting of the Judicial Transparency and Ethics Act, a sweeping bill requiring real-time financial disclosures, third-party audits, and ethics oversight for Supreme Court justices, something that had never been done before. "It's not just overdue," one senator said, "it's existential." The hearings may have ended, but the transformation had begun, because the message was now etched into every screen, every street corner, every classroom and courtroom across the nation. Power, when left unexamined, rots. But truth, when spoken with clarity, can reset a system. Jasmine's calm stare, her quiet delivery, and her refusal to flinch had shaken the foundation of America's highest bench. And in doing so, she reminded the nation of something we keep forgetting. The robe does not define justice, the truth does. And for millions watching, that truth didn't come from the top. It came from across the table, and it will echo for generations. And just like that, silence replaced resistance. Clarence Thomas did not hold another press conference. He did not issue a statement of defense, nor summon lawyers to spin a counterattack. Instead, a brief, tightly worded memo arrived from his chambers. Effective immediately, Justice Clarence Thomas is stepping away from public duties due to health-related concerns. No media appearances, no public apology. Just silence. Eerie, complete, and absolute. After decades of speaking from the bench, his legacy ended not with thunder, but with quiet retreat. There were no farewell interviews, no televised goodbyes. The court calendar simply adjusted. His name faded from the docket. And just like the long shadow he once cast over rulings that shaped generations, his absence became louder than his voice had ever been. No lawsuits followed, no headlines screamed of accountability. The chapter closed itself, with the sound of doors that would never reopen. But while one figure vanished into shadows, another stepped into something far brighter. Jasmine Crockett did not host victory rallies or bathe in personal glory. She never called it a triumph over a man. At every podium, she said the same words with steady conviction. This was never about me. It was about justice, about who gets to speak for America. Her voice never rose in arrogance. It rose in resonance. The country listened, and this time it heard. She received countless invitations from elite institutions, cable networks, and private donors eager to tie themselves to her momentum. But Jasmine declined most of them. Instead, she accepted one particular invitation to speak at the graduation ceremony of a small, overlooked law school in Ohio. The room was modest. Folding chairs replaced velvet ones, and the stage bore no gold-trimmed emblems, only a wooden podium and rows of fresh faces. She stepped forward, wearing no judicial robe, only a dark blue dress and fire in her eyes. Her speech lasted just under 10 minutes, but every word hit like lightning. Justice does not live only in the marble halls of Harvard or Yale, she told the students. It lives wherever we choose truth over silence. She paused. The crowd froze. Then came applause. Not polite, not rehearsed, but thunderous. That day, justice didn't sound like a gavel. It sounded like hope finally echoing through places long ignored. Within months, law schools across America saw a seismic shift. Applications surged, not at Harvard or Yale, but at regional, affordable institutions in Detroit, Tulsa, El Paso, and Birmingham. Professors reported a new kind of student, one driven not by prestige, but by purpose. One admissions officer called it the Crockett effect, and suddenly the legal profession felt less like an ivory tower and more like a mission field. The media tried to package her rise as another David versus Goliath narrative, but Jasmine never fed the spectacle. When asked what she thought of Clarence Thomas's departure, she replied with calm finality, "I wish him peace, but I will not silence the truth to preserve comfort." The country didn't just remember what she did. It began to question what it had once accepted. People debated in diners, barbershops, classrooms. What else had been buried under robes and rituals? In cities across America, small community legal clinics reported record volunteer signups. Retired lawyers re-entered practice, saying they felt something they hadn't felt in years: urgency. One legal columnist wrote, "For the first time in a long time, the law feels like it belongs to the people again." That sentiment, once rare, now grew louder with each passing month. The air didn't just shift, it crackled with change. And in the hearts of Americans once numb to justice, belief stirred again. Not in heroes or politicians, but in the power of truth, spoken by anyone brave enough to say it aloud. People realized systems don't change because one person stands. They change when enough people refuse to sit. That realization didn't come from Washington. It came from the quiet courage of neighborhoods, classrooms, and courtrooms too small for television cameras. The final message echoed through murals, op-eds, graduation caps, and courtroom speeches. Power, no matter how grand, cannot outrun the truth. Power, no matter how grand, cannot outrun the truth. These words became a creed, spoken not just in English, but in Spanish, Vietnamese, Creole, Arabic. The truth didn't belong to one side of the aisle anymore. It belonged to everyone bold enough to demand it. And justice, real justice, no longer felt like a privilege reserved for the elite. It became something that breathed through everyday voices, through teachers, nurses, mechanics, mothers. As Jasmine had said from the start, justice does not live only in the marble halls. It lives wherever we choose truth over silence. Those words weren't just heard. They were lived. In the final image, the old judge's gavel sat alone on a polished bench. Once wielded like a weapon, now it bore a hairline crack running down its center. Not broken in anger, not shattered in protest, just quietly split, as if the weight of unchecked power had finally become too much for it to bear. That small fracture was not a sign of destruction. It was a beginning. It marked the end of a chapter where robes protected the untouchable and verdicts favored the powerful. And it opened a new one, where justice could no longer be hidden in chambers or whispered in privilege. A new chapter where courage didn't wear titles, but it carried truth. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.